And welcome to another episode of the Kitchings Table here on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9 FM. You can also check us out on YouTube, Facebook Live, Roku, and GPAC 23. Good morning. I'm your host, Earl Kitchings, and always delighted to be with you to bring you more information and or news, depending on which one we're talking about from the world as it spins around each and every day, 365. So we are glad that we are able to communicate with you this morning. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Ronleen Kennedy. And Ronleen, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
It's a beautiful day, and hopefully it will be a great day. Nothing like having a positive day to make your day go fast and smooth. It's funny how when things get out of kilter, out of sorts, how the day can just seem to be so long. But when everything's going smoothly, it goes fast.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the fast today.
Great. So we're going to be talking about one is especially important thing in the lives of parents and their children, and that is education. And our topic today is driven to succeed or excel. And this has to do with something Ron Lean has discovered and wants to point out today as it relates to children's education. So I'm going to get her started off with a quote from Jan Hunt, who is a specialist in school counseling. And she states this: children are naturally curious and have a built in desire to learn firsthand about the world around them. Children are naturally curious, and it's already built into them to want to learn firsthand about what's going on in their world. So I'm going to start it off with that. See what you say to that.
I love that quote because that is, when I think about why we pick up a book in the first place, because we want to know what's in it. We want to know what the pictures are. We want to know what the words say, at a very young age. And I remember talk about my little sisters for a moment, but I remembered when they learned to write their first words. And it was based on the words that they saw every day as they were walking home from school. And that was on the side of a convenience store. So one of the first words was bread. And and they wrote out the other words. I was like, okay, where do you get that from? And so they say we see it every day. And then of course in their everyday walk, stop signs, that kind of thing. um, One of the signs was slow down. So those things we learn along the way. And you know, to be able to look at a child who is learning, especially if they're processing math equations. When Johnny goes to the store and he um, purchased 3 oranges, how much does it cost if the oranges cost 25 cents a piece? That kind of thing. So that's spot on. Thank you.
Well, speaking of reading and speaking of walking to the store and reading the side of the convenience store, and you cited the word bread, oftentimes so many words are made up of either adding or deleting a letter to make it a different word. So when you said bread, I'm like, well, if you drop off the B, that would be either read or read. So, you, and then when you said stop, if you drop off the S, that will become top. So sometimes those kind of games can help children learn very easily and very quickly because it's, I think kids enjoy having some type of fun challenge to learning. And of course, as we've learned that repetition is a key and most important role in our children learning because when you think about your alphabets, the alphabets were repetitiously said in elementary school every morning in class. You would have to, that seemed like that would be the first thing in first grade or at least second grade, the teacher would teach you. But you would go say your ABCs, and it had a little tune to it to help you remember it. And I think even to this day, some 60 plus years later, you can still recite your alphabets to that same tune. I don't know if that tune is used or the way they teach alphabets is the same way it's done now, but that tune helped the memory put those letters in place because it had that distinct rhythm to it. So I think the repetitions part for teaching our children is so key and important.
Mm. When I heard you say that about the tune of the alphabet, the first thing I thought about is
Okay.
cheerleading.
Cheerleading.
Yes.
Okay.
Victory is the first word that I heard spelled and with the cheers, Victory,
Oh, okay.
that kind of thing.
I see.
And I remember in the movie Aquila and the Bee when
Mm-hmm.
she found her rhythm to spelling,
Right.
and remembering, being able to sound things out, being able to figure things out that goes into problem solving, like, okay, what's the next letter, and trying to get that phonetically sound into your mind. And when I think about that, that just takes me, even down to when you see a lot of cities and um, the pronunciations for that, or when they're talking about towns and things like that on a geography sense of things. So, we need these. It starts all with the alphabet.
Well, everything does start with the alphabet when we talk about reading and writing. And I'm glad you mentioned that particular movie, Aquila and the Bee. I would put that as one of the top three educational movies for children and parents to watch together
Mhm,
because of the dynamics of how that process worked for her to learn. And she became so engaged with learning and wanting to learn how to spell words. And fortunately for her, there was a man who helped her with her phonetics in breaking down words. And he opened up all these books to her to get the basis of where words come from, which would help her spell these words. And if you recall, he gave her like 5,000 words
mhm.
to memorize and to spell backwards and forwards. And that's just a very beautiful movie that I'm glad it was made. I'm glad that they had the cast that they had. I'm glad it was about a little black girl learning how to spell with the help of a professor who had the patience to want to teach her through the discipline of what he was doing. So if a parent has a child that's somewhere between fifth and seventh grade, this is an excellent movie to help with teaching a child and getting them interested in something because uh, Miss Hunt also went on to say in the article she wrote that students may be motivated by their interest in a topic, prior success in a subject matter, a desire to please parents or teachers, or simply by their own drive to succeed. So those four things are what cause children and people in general to want to educate themselves. Interest, success, desire, and drive.
Mhm.
And when you combine all those things together, you become a very motivated individual who wants to be like a sponge and soak it up as much as you can. And there are not enough books, there are not enough words, there are not enough anything that challenge you for not wanting to know more about them. And I remember the a scene from the movie Malcolm X where uh, the teacher taught Malcolm in prison, the first book he taught him to learn from was the dictionary. And he said, we're going to start from the very beginning with the first letter and the first word of the alphabet in the dictionary, A's. And, if you read the dictionary, let me tell you, you are a very learned person because all those words, the spelling, the pronunciation, the meaning, and the different meanings. And I think that was one of the beautiful things of being taught spelling and words, that it wasn't just one meaning for a word. A word has more than one meaning based on the content and the context of how you use it. And I think, when we were growing up, teachers would start off some mornings, not even before we did the alphabets. When you got to third and fourth grade, there was no need to really do the alphabets. I think alphabets was a kindergarten, first grade thing. But when we started learning to spell words, the teacher would just tell you, take out a piece of paper. Uh, they giving you your vocabulary words the day before, 2 days before, and they said, we're going to spell those words I gave you. And she recites those words 1 through 10. There's always 10 words, and each word was worth 10 points. And you got 10 right, you got 100, and so on and so forth. But it taught us that repetition of learning that you had to do. So even when we were reading, in the back of certain chapters of the books, they would have a vocabulary list of the words that were in the story or the chapter you just read. And that would be the vocabulary test that you would have to learn, sometimes from the teacher going over those words that you read. So repetition in reading and writing is as important as repetition in doing math. So when students are motivated by something, a topic they like, when they've had success in their classes, if success, as far as I'm concerned, for most children starts at a B and goes up. I know some teachers or some people might say, well, you start them at a C. C is average. If you want to set the bar low there, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. But when you set it higher, that means they got to reach higher. uh, Pleasing their parents or their teachers, and then being driven by their own success. When they know they can succeed, they're driven to succeed. And one thing she did not say in this piece, as it relates to student learning, was competition amongst your peers also drives you to learn. I guarantee you that when you feel you're in competition with someone else to do as well or better than them, and you're getting awarded points for it and incentives for it, you will put an extra effort into learning because you want to, as they say, show out that you are a very smart or adept student. So I thank her for those 4 points for engaging students in learning.
Yes, that is. I like that concept. That each one teach one. That's what comes to mind in setting the bar. And the articles that I've been reading also, it talks about how children set out to please people, so that they can learn. As you said, um, the more that a person is encouraged to learn more, they will. So when it comes down to children, I like when those games are played. And that was another thing about what the article was saying. There are all types of styles to be able to reach a child. So where one game doesn't work, maybe another one will, to be able to keep their interest. So when you talked about the word bread, as in if you drop the B, what does it read then? And so you could say read or read, that kind of thing. And then you tell them, well, okay, well, that sounds good. Now, what does it mean? It's like, oh, you want the definition too? And so that they have to pull out that dictionary and go to reading or whatever. And it's like, okay. And then it's like, what tense is it in? Past tense, future tense, present tense, that kind of thing. And then it's like, oh, it's for them, it may be getting too hard. They'll tell you that, oh, it's too hard or whatever. And then if you're that type of person to be able to show them how to break it down, it becomes easier to them. And then you'll find them off in a corner teaching someone else, so that each one teach one method. And, that goes very well with the siblings being able to pass that through the family. So thank you for bringing that out.
Well, as long as we take the time to teach, to engage in teaching and make it not so challenging, but make it fun and share with them the importance. Sometimes we don't always share the importance of why you need to learn, why it's important to read, why it's important to learn how to write. Because when you communicate in two ways. You either write it or you speak it. And when you are putting words together to make thoughts or sentences, it has to make sense. So if you can't put the right words together to make express yourself or express what you're thinking or feeling, it leaves a void. And sometimes uh, some children have challenges with that. And if you don't spend the time to help them to get better with it, they'll shut down on you and then you can't open them back up again. So these are some of the things in working with children, especially in the elementary school grade levels, because these are the formative years and these are the, as they say, they're like breakfast. They're the most important years of learning because this is where you get your base, your foundation, and you go from there. uh, Ms. Hunt also indicated two types of motivation for learning: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic and extrinsic. And intrinsic motivates individuals to learn because of a desire that comes from within inside of themselves. When you are motivated from inside, you have a thirst, you have a different passion for it. You want to learn, you want to read, you can't get enough. Somebody almost has to tell you to put the book down and stop reading so you can do this or do that. And then the extrinsic is that outside force that, excuse me, involves encouraging students or children to learn. And those come from, first and foremost, from parents. They're the first extrinsic teaching tool that a child will learn, or know, rather. And then when they go to school, the teacher becomes that other extrinsic individual for teaching. So it's like a puzzle. You send them out in the mornings, you take them to school. You've taught them something in the morning, you give them a piece. So now they go to school where they have to plug that piece in, and then the school gives them a piece. And then when they come home, you have to plug that into what you know to see if they connect. And this lifelong teaching puzzle, at least in the first 5 years of their learning, it grows significantly over time. And as long as you're putting the right pieces together, then the children, I guarantee you this, as long as you are teaching them in a way that engages them, then they want to learn. And I found that making some things a challenge, making them a fun challenge, or just asking a child a crazy educational thought. Um, One of my favorite questions to ask children is, where does chocolate milk come from? Where or what color is the sky on a cloudy day? On a cloudy day, ask a child what color is the sky, and like most adults, they will give you the answer. And on a cloudy day, Ronline, what would you say is the color of the sky?
I would still say blue.
That's because you've been educated to know that.
Right.
But as a child, you look up in the sky
You
and
see
you
all the
probably dispute your teacher. Say, no, the sky is gray today. I'm looking at the sky, it's gray. And it's like, no, that's not the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized this. The first time I realized this was on a plane trip. And once we got above the clouds, everything was just blue. It's that sky blue. And when you drop below the clouds, well, you can't see the blue because it's covered up by the clouds. So I'm like, oh, so the sky as we know it is always blue, and the clouds are either white or gray or dark in color, and that's what we see. But that's not the sky. The sky and a cloud are two distinct things. But when you ask a child that, they will look at you and say, "No, that's not the color of the sky." And they look at you and they look up at the sky and be like, "I'm looking at the sky right now, and it is gray." It's like that's not the sky.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing about the where does chocolate milk come from? I had a parent question me one day when they were picking up their child as to why I was teaching their child that chocolate milk comes from a what kind of cow?
Okay. And so she was saying,
Why are you teaching my child that chocolate milk comes from a chocolate cow? I said, because it does. No, it doesn't. I say, have you ever seen a chocolate cow? And she's like, well, no. I said, well, so how do you know that it doesn't come? But just the thought of that, because it's the same concept or premise that when we have when the holiday or the season of Easter comes, we've taught our children that the Easter bunny brings us Easter eggs, right?
Hmm.
I've never seen a rabbit lay an egg.
Correct.
So how can the eggs come from the rabbit? Or is the rabbit just the FedEx or UPS for Easter that's just delivering the eggs? But the concept is that you would have children believe that the Easter eggs come from rabbits. And I would take it one step further. And for those people who believe in Santa Claus, it's like, well, do you believe in Santa Claus? Well, no. Well, where do you think all those gifts come from? And it's an adult thing when you start thinking about it. But for children, you challenge them with that, because when I would ask them that, we would be in the cafeteria and be going through the lunch line, and ask them to be like chocolate milk. I said, "Do you know where chocolate milk comes from?" And once they grasp what you're saying and they understand that that kind of makes sense, chocolate, because white milk, regular milk, comes from a cow. Chocolate milk, okay, I can see the concept. It comes from a chocolate cow. Got a chocolate cow. Then I asked them, I said, so where does strawberry milk come from? And you know what they said?
A strawberry
A
cow.
strawberry cow. And that makes school sometimes a little bit more fun when someone just gives you a different perspective. So that's an extrinsic learning manner to teach children simple things, because I also ask them, how do birds fly out all day long and can return to their nest after being away from that tree? You know, because when you looking at it from above, all the trees look alike. So how do you know how to get back to your nest? And I had one kid say, "Well, they must have a GPS system." I'm like, "Well, that pretty much that's a good answer, because yes, they do. They don't have a GPS like we have, but they're able to fly from tree to tree to tree to tree and come back to their nest as if there's a beacon or a GPS that guides them right back to their nest." And that part of life is unexplainable, but it happens.
You're right. And back to when you were asking me, what color the sky is, when you say that's because you were educated, and I didn't think about that in the moment that you said it, but as you were talking about that a little bit more, I was like, well, how did I know that the sky is blue? Always. And goes back to what you've learned along the way when you mentioned the airplane. My airplane rides, took place very early in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't matter if it was raining or not once we, as you say, once we got above those clouds. And I looked at the sky and I remember asking, you know, why, how does the clouds cover the sky, that kind of thing. And remember, we talked a little while ago about encyclopedias. So
Mm-hmm.
I had my encyclopedias at a very young age
Mm-hmm.
and took the time to read through those volumes of it. So I guess the more you learn, the more you read, the more you're educating yourself, the more your self awareness of your environment around you becomes key. And as you said, very early, and the earlier you can get it, be exposed to things like that, it plays a part in your entire life of for learning. Be a life learner. As a matter of fact, it encourages you to do so. So that brings us to what we're going to be delving into, this exercise that this teacher had done for her students. Um, she was she teaches middle school. And in teaching middle school, they have the changing of classes. So she touches over 100 classes a day.
100
And
students,
I'm sorry, over 100 students a
not
day.
100
You would
classes.
be worn out if otherwise,
You
right?
couldn't make it.
She would be worn out. So, what transpired for her to do this is what we went through with the pandemic, the isolation, virtual being, virtual become virtual learners rather than in classroom learners.
Mm-hmm.
And many people, were lost during the pandemic, and a lot of homes, they were turned into a place for caregiving, because oftentimes that's what happens. Someone in the family was 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 sick, or many people in the family were sick, and as one child said, they understood what sick bay was from
Mm.
um, Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
what their home literally turned into, and it was like, the recovery period was not happening as fast as it would have with a common cold or a flu or the flu.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, um, the teacher was listening to their experience over time, and she realized that she had a class that was filled with, you know, people who were, used to failing, failing their way through school. And she said, based on the things that they would come to her with, the questions that they would ask her, she couldn't understand why these children were failing.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't want to be that teacher who passed them along, because now they're facing going to high school. And
Mm-hmm.
she wanted to know what could she do to turn her classroom around. And so she said she watched Oprah,
Mm-hmm.
and Oprah did a series of, dealing with children, and, their experiences, and talking about, they would be asked a question, as far as what was the worst, has anyone said anything that hurt you so deeply that it caused you to cry, and hold up your hand. And so for those who held their hand up, other students were watching them and was putting the doing the symbol for love.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know that, hey, we support you. We understand how you feel, and that has happened to us from time to time. But we'll tell you what we did in order to get over it or get through it, because sometimes you don't get over things, but you find a way to cope with it. So I'll come back after you do the station identification to tell you the results of what happened with her exercise.
Looking forward to hearing the rest of this story. Welcome to the Kitchings Table here every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9 FM. Catch us on YouTube, Facebook Live, Roku, and GPAC 23. We want to thank the staff and management of Awesome Radio, WBISLP, for giving us an opportunity to bring you the Kitchings Table on Tuesday morning. I'm your host, W. Earl Kitchings, and joining me is Ronleen Kennedy, my co-host, and we're talking about education, driven to excel or succeed. And today, Ronleen is bringing us a little bit more of a story she found about a teacher engaging children in the middle school level. Ronleen, would you please finish that story because it sounds so interesting?
Gladly. So, being that she was teaching, and that kind of thing, and uh, was learning from them what they experienced at home during the pandemic, and being, going from their normal routine, daily routine, to now having to take care of individuals in the home. And in some cases, grandparents, had to come and live with them um, before going to the nursing home or whatever the situation was. And so, with that being said, what she noticed is that it wasn't a lot of, it was more complaining, if you will, than it was being grateful to have your grandparents there or whatever. And then she was like, they were acting out how slowly they would move and things like that. So she came up with this exercise. She made what they would call flashcards in our time. She made some flashcards, and each student had to take a couple of flashcards. They were given out in category. And she said, this exercise is to teach you why you are here. Why is it important for you to show up every day and actually learn to be able to take something with you? And she said, and I want you to understand that you are our future. And I need you to understand what that means, because people came before you and they were sitting in the same place where you're sitting at today. And now they are and have been impacting your future. And so, of course, they had things to say about that. But anyway, the exercise got on the way, and students had to choose, you know, blindness, uh, back injury, wheelchair, So, and then she said, now, what does it look like when you're in the wheelchair? You're not able to go anywhere that you want to go. What do you have to do? And so students were like, well, I'm going to add electric wheelchair because I can control where I want to be or whatever. And so she would use the thing, the other categories. Do you have access to a wheelchair ramp? you know. And once they realized that they no longer had the ability to do what they want to do, go where they want to go, if they were operating with prosthesis, if they were operating with no hands, it was something of them that restricted them, that they could not get up and go like they would normally, do their normal day to day. And it went on to add money to the situation. You needed this medication and it cost this amount and that kind of thing. And so, whether or not you had Medicaid, Medicare, if you had to deal with food stamps and things like that, if it wasn't enough to bring money into your household, you couldn't get out, then you had to lean on someone, you had to depend on someone. And so she took that further, and she said, okay, I'm returning you all back to yourselves. I need you all to write an essay of what you learned. And so they did. And the essay She said it was a little impactful, but not what she was looking for. And so then she reversed the role. She said, okay, how does it feel to be yourselves again? And so, anyway, she told them to run around the class, jump up and down. They came back and they was talking about how they felt or whatever. She had them to do an essay about their freedom that they were feeling at that point. And then she said to them, okay, you all had your occupations, you knew how your money was coming in or whatever. She said, but now you're eighth graders. How many have worked already? No hand went up. She said, okay, how do you bring money in? No hands went up. And then she said, all right, you all have just been struck by a car by a drunk driver. And these are your injuries. Look around the room. No one has, you just admitted no one has made any money. Now, who are you depending on? And think about the people that has to depend on you. Now what? And she said, when she told them to write an essay about that, she said, that's when she knew things were turning. And she said, now that you have expressed that, who are the 10 people? I need you to write 10 people and tell them in this moment how you feel about the things that they have gone through and the role that you have played and what you're going to do in order to turn things around. And she said, and the most important thing is someone impacted your life with the decisions that were made before you. How would you be able to impact someone else's life as you become the future leaders? What are the solutions? So, when we were talking about the impact that it has on economics for the school system, Earl, this woman expressed there were some powerful solutions that came about. They realized that what has happened can happen to anyone, and they have just been fortunate. And they went on to stop playing around in school, getting those failing grades to wherein now they wanted to learn. They were thirsting after knowledge, as you had placed earlier in our conversation. So thanks for allowing me to share that.
Well, that's a wonderful story about a teacher wanting to give children or students an opportunity to actively engage in their education and the extending of their education to go forward, because school is a year to year process that each year you layer one more thing or one more opportunity or opportunities for learning more than you did the year before. And you don't jump ahead and skip around. It's in succession that you have to do one thing after another, one grade after another, because each year you have to be taught in a very methodical way for learning. So her exercise for giving them opportunities to learn in that particular manner probably helped many of them uh, learn and engage. And for others, it gave them a different perspective and perhaps might have motivated them to want to at least be more engaged with learning, because when it's more direct and personal to you, then you do it from a different perspective. Um, One of the things that, in looking at some information about teaching children and helping them to learn, was a comment that was made about nurturing a child's love for learning begins with trust. Trust. And when we trust our children to want to learn, because from infancy until they get to the point where others influence their learning, they are engaged in wanting to learn how to walk, to talk, to stand, uh, and do other things that will help them participate in their daily life experience, because they want to participate in what's going on. So they are definitely interested and definitely engaged in learning in those formative years, because unless they do that, they will, I guess, feel somewhat left out, or they're not in the mix. And it's unfortunate that as children get older, sometimes that yearning to learn drops off.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about that experience of school, and I can only speak for myself, that experience for learning and that experience for going to school every day to learn, that's a major factor in our lives to extend just how far we will go with educating ourselves, and taking advantage of opportunities to get educated. However, not everyone had positive experiences in school. Not everyone had positive experiences and results in performing in school, and it causes kids to drop out. It causes them not to want to learn. It causes them to somewhat turn their back on educating themselves. Um, Even to the extent beyond that, if you didn't have a good experience in school, especially in high school, you may not want to, see your classmates or be around your classmates or go to class reunions, because that experience was not that good for you. So the nurturing of a child's love for learning, with trust in the formative years, but continuing that pattern, and it doesn't. Well, of course, getting through high school and getting your diploma in high school is a journey that everyone is pleased and happy about. And that does take, that's a 12-year journey from first grade to 12th grade. So you can get to that. And that's the longest educational journey for many of us that we will ever experience. But it all gives us the foundations so that we can be integral parts of our society, so that we can work, communicate, have social involvement. All these things are part of that educational process. I was reading something from a gentleman by the name of John Gatto, who made this observation. He says it's just impossible for education and schooling ever to be the same thing.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, education and schooling. Hmm, what is the distinction between those two things? And to me, it sounds like schooling is the preparation, and education is what we learn. So I go to school to be prepared, but once I get to school, I get educated by what I'm taught and what I learn. And from my thinking, that's why I can understand what his statement reads, but maybe everybody doesn't see it that way.
Mm. That's one way of bringing it forward like that, because you think about the children that have learning disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
and what she also pointed out with her study, that with her exercise that she did, is because um, there are children that have learning disabilities in her class. And when she used the scenario as in all of them just been struck by a drunk driver, and now whatever their injuries were, whatever it was, um, they had to learn how to speak, they had to learn how to communicate right. Um, these things are, they had to learn how to walk again, go through rehabilitation, whatever it was that they had chosen. And the people who had disabilities, learning disabilities or whatever, they realized, and the ones that didn't, they realized they were all in the same playing field. So it didn't matter what you knew before, all of that was gone. It's a matter of what can you learn, how quickly
Mm-hmm.
can you learn it. And that's another thing that she noticed, that it was a quick turnaround because now it became a competition. It began to end excuses for those that were coming to school acting out, if you will, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They began to really understand, like, wait a minute, you telling me I can't speak, Mrs. Green? I can't
Mm-hmm.
talk. And she said, but no, she said, you cannot. She said, however, there are tools here to help you to be able to speak again, to be able to learn again. And everybody is, they don't, one of the students told her that I couldn't get it because, I thought I had always been walking.
Right. Right.
I thought I always had been talking, but now I'm realizing that this was learned over time. And so it
Exactly.
was like, okay, well, now that I know how to pronounce words or what, and it just took flight from there. And, the books, she began to challenge them with the different books that were in the classroom. And, like I said, she told them, okay, now that you have this experience, write your essays or whatever, write your solutions and that kind of thing, because this is the kind of thing that you're going to be able to take to Congress. This is the kind of thing that you're going to be able to take to your state representatives and things like that. These are the kind of things that you're going to be able to take to your president. And then, questions started coming up. Well, why does medication cost so much? What do they put in it? So it started the inquisitiveness of, where does things actually come from? Who are the producers, manufacturers and things like that. So with that said, Earl, those, and then I didn't talk about the other part, but of course it was 100 students that she took through that thing. The other students that was outside of that, into that experiment that she did, they were the analysts. They
Mm.
got a chance to see how many people can be transformed, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They made their recommendations and things like that in their reports. And we talked about book reports not too long ago as well. And so she started a building block with them to let them know that, pretty soon you'll be making these decisions. If not
Right.
for the world, you'll be making it within your own household. You may be put in charge with your family. You might be the next one, because a lot of them had lost their parents as well. So with those building blocks, my hat goes off to the teachers, with the salute, because you have to get creative in your classroom. And now that is so many things being challenged in that classroom. How do you reach your students? They have so many factors that's at their neck, if you will.
Well, the educational challenge is a daily challenge, and embracing something that is so valuable. I think uh, parents and children of those parents from other countries see the value of education at such a high level that they basically make it a point for their children to learn at a very higher and more intense level, and the extracurricular activities are minimized. They don't care about whether or not you're going to play a sport or be in the band or do cheerleading or things like that. They only care about how much knowledge and education you are taking in to prepare you for the world as the world comes to you. Because when you were trying to get those jobs that uh, not only pay well, but take you to a higher level of experiencing those things to make life better. They're more concerned about that than, you know, whether or not you're a football or basketball player. So thank you so very much for bringing that story and those concepts to us today from that teaching model. This has been very, very enlightening. We're going to have to close on that, Ronline, today. This is the Kitchings Table, heard every Tuesday morning on Awesome Radio, WBIS LP 106.9 FM. You can catch us on social media platforms at Facebook Live, YouTube, Roku, and GPAC 23. Today, we've been talking about education driven to excel for our children and for parents to understand the importance of why teaching and learning and getting that education is so important, but yet teaching outside of the box can be even more pivotal in helping our children to be more engaged because the world is moving faster each and every day. It's getting more and more uh, technology driven, more science and math driven. Things are just going faster, and no one's slowing down to try to bring you along if you don't want to come along. They're going to just leave you behind. So thank you, Ronline, for that. And that's going to do it for us on this episode of the Kitchens Table. So until next week, as I always say, do something good for someone else today. For my co-host, Ronline Kennedy, I'm Earl Kitchings. Until next Tuesday morning on the Kitchens Tables, we say take care. Bye-bye.
See you soon.